All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone from wherever you're joining. And we're really quite pleased to have you here with us today. Over the course of the session, we will have people coming in and out of the webinar, but we will be also recording and streaming the webinar afterwards. So if you do have to leave at any point, we'll make sure that you're able to access that as well. My name is Stephen Damianos, and I am the Executive Director of the Neurorights Foundation, and it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you to our symposium on mental augmentation, which truly is a new frontier for human rights. And we are really honored to have an esteemed list of panelists with us who will be sharing their expertise and their insight on a really cutting edge area of neurotechnologies, society, and the future of what it means to be human. And to kick off this event, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Dr. Raphael Yuste, who really needs no introduction and is one of the world's leading experts in the space of neurotechnologies and increasingly neurotechnologies and human rights. And Dr. Yuste will be sharing some opening remarks that serve to frame the next few hours that we're going to share together and explain what mental augmentation is and why this is an issue that we want to be diving into. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Yuste.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning or afternoon or evening, everyone. Thanks for joining our symposium. My name is Raphael Yuste. I'm a professor of the Neurotechnology Center at Columbia and the chairman of the Neurorights Foundation. So let me try to give you some context for why we're here today. So this all has to do with neurotechnology, which we can define as methods or devices or tools to do two things, either to record the activity of the brain or of the nervous system, to be more precise, that has both the central nervous system, including the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system that has the ganglia and the nerves in the rest of the body. So this new technology can be used to either measure that activity or to change it, to manipulate it, to modulate that activity. That's the only thing it does. It essentially senses and changes neural activity. And this new technology can be traditionally was electrical, built with devices that are either chips that you can insert into the brain or electrodes you can insert into the brain, or they can be also wearables, things you can wear on your head, like electroencephalography, for example. Neurotechnology can also be magnetic. Both you probably are familiar with magnetic brain scanners, fMRI, or magnetic ways to stimulate the brain from, again, with non-implantable neurotechnology. And neurotechnology can also be optical. This is the kind of thing that we do in the lab using advanced lasers, holographic optogenetics to both record and manipulate brain activity with single cell resolution. And more recently, there's also a great development of neurotechnology with other methods, acoustical neurotechnology, nano neurotechnology, etc. So why is neurotechnology important? Why do we care? Well, because the brain is not just another organ of the body, but it happens to be the organ that generates all of our mental and cognitive activities, from your thoughts, your memories, your imagination, your emotions, decision-making, your personality, your consciousness, even the subconscious, what you don't know you have in there with you. It all doesn't happen out of thin air, but it's the result of the firing of the activity of these neurons that you have in your nervous system. So you have technology that enables you to measure that activity and to change it. By definition, the same technology can be used to measure mental activity and to change it. And this has formidable benefits. First, scientific benefits. Laboratories like ours and many groups around the world are using this technology to try to understand how the brain works and try to understand how the brain generates the human mind. And this could lead to, I think, maybe the culmination of humanism, to try to understand what is the essence of a human being, which is the mind of the person. This is something that defines our species. There are also great benefits for neurotechnology on the medical field, and that's the reason that many of us went into this development of neurotechnology to help patients, because as you are aware from personal experience with family members or friends, brain diseases are from mental or neurological diseases have essentially no cure. With very few exceptions, there's very little we can do as doctors to help patients that suffer from a host of diseases that go from Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, stroke, epilepsy, Parkinson, dementia, etc., etc., etc. You can imagine this is the dark corner of medicine, in spite of the heroic efforts of our colleagues in neurology and psychiatry that are really trying to help these patients with their hands tied behind their back, because we don't understand how the nervous system works yet, and we cannot quite cure these diseases by attacking the causes. But then neurotechnology has also great technological benefits that are starting to appear. And this has to do with the fact that the brain and the nervous system of all animals uses algorithms that could be revolutionary for the computer industry. And also the tech companies could use devices, neurotechnological devices, particularly wearable devices, as to build sort of the iPhone of the future, which a device that instead of having it in our pocket, we would have it on top of our head. And so why is neurotechnology important now? So this has to do with the US Brain Initiative that was launched in 2013 by President Obama, a large-scale project to develop neurotechnology that currently employs 550 labs with an estimated budget for this fiscal year of close to $800 million, which has revolutionized essentially the development of neurotechnology. Neurotechnology is flourishing, not just in the US. The Brain Initiative of the US led to similar initiatives in other countries, including China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada, and also accompanied by a similar initiative in Europe at the same time. So we have a worldwide push to develop this neurotechnology for scientific, for medical, and for technological reasons. And this leads me to the Neurotechnology Center, which was founded here at Columbia in 2014 as Columbia's answer to the US Brain Initiative to coordinate a series of laboratories that were interested in working in the development of neurotechnology. And since 2014, our center has actually done a lot of things, but in particular, we've organized scientific meetings and symposium. In fact, this is the 23rd symposia that we've organized. And I have to draw your attention to a symposium that we organized in 2016 on the ethical and societal issues related to neurotechnology, which led to a 2017 meeting here at Columbia in the Morningside campus of a group of 25 experts, which call ourselves the Morningside Group. And this group had people representing experts neurotechnology, but also people coming from the clinic, psychiatry, neurology, neurosurgery, people coming from the fledgling neurotech industry, from the tech industry, and people coming from ethics, from philosophy, from the law, etc. And we studied the ethical and societal issues related to the fast development of neurotechnology and implantation of neurotechnology in the population. And we came up with the idea of Neurorights as areas of concerns where we could foresee serious ethical and societal issues that could be best approached with a human rights perspective. So for each of these areas, we actually propose a human rights solution. We argue for a right to mental privacy, so that the content from our brain activity can be decoded without our consent, the right to our own mental identity, to our own agency, to our decision-making. And in particular, we argue for the right of equal access to mental augmentation, which we're going to be discussing today. We started discussing the possibility of mentally augmenting humans by modulating and manipulating brain activity with neurotechnology. And with this agenda of Neurorights, since 2017, we decided to get involved, and we created a foundation with my colleague Jared Genser, an international human rights lawyer that you'll meet later in the meeting, and with Jamie Davis, an entrepreneur. And this foundation is called the Neurorights Foundation, and its goal is to foster research, advocacy, and outreach of these neurorights. No, and very, very briefly, in terms of our research, we generate a gap analysis that studies the current human rights treaties of the UN, 8 of the major human rights treaties, with respect to the neurorights problematic. And we, in this gap analysis, reveals that there are major failures or gaps in the current human rights system to deal with some of the problems that are emerging from neurotechnology. We also released last year a consumer agreement analysis of 30 commercial neurotechnology companies that sell wearable devices. And we studied their consumer user agreements, and we found that they were also not great, that all companies took possession of the data of the user, and most companies allowed themselves to sell it to third parties. So it's essentially showed an unregulated landscape of neurotechnology, of commercial neurotechnology. And then we've also worked on advocacy. We have spearheaded 4 initiatives in the world where neural data and brain activity is actually protected. And we, through these efforts in the Republic of Chile and Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, in the state of California and Colorado, this current legislation, constitutional amendments, or bills that protect brain data as a fundamental right of the citizen. We also, in terms of advocacy, we work with the UN treaty bodies and with the Secretary General's office to explore the addition of special comments and provisions to existing human rights treaties to expand their purview so that they incorporated protection for brain activity and brain data. And just finally, we've also worked on the outreach, the vibrant program of outreach, including a movie that we made with the documentary filmmaker Werner Herzog, Theater of Thought, which analyzes essentially primary neurotechnology, and a series of lectures and meetings and symposium like this one. And this brings me to today's meeting. So the title is Neural Augmentation, a New Frontier for Human Rights. And I would like to define mental augmentation as the enhancement. It's very simple, the enhancement of mental and cognitive abilities with neurotechnologies. So we're going to be discussing how these new technologies that we just defined can be used or could be used to enhance human mental and cognitive abilities. We're not going to be talking about physical enhancement. We're not talking about pharmacology, we're not talking about biometrics. These are all very important issues, but this is not our focus today. We think the time is right to discuss mental augmentation. There was a study already published 3 years ago from Boston University, enhancing memory in a set of volunteers with magnetic stimulation. And we think that this is a critical issue, an next frontier after mental privacy for human rights is mental augmentation. Our position on this is not science fiction. There are fundamental implications for the future of our species. We really are discussing what type of human being we want to be. And this is a critical issue that many different angles how to approach it. Our angle is to approach it from the point of view of human rights. So we have 4 panels which mix experts in neurotechnology and experts in human rights. Now we're going to first talk about the medical applications of medical enhancement using neurotechnology. Then we're going to be discussing consumer applications, then national security application, military application, and finally a panel on fair access or mental augmentation. The program has been put together by my 2 colleagues, Lucas Soskiewicz and Stephen Damianos, and I thank them for, they deserve all the credit for this, and thank them for doing this so well. I also wanted to thank the speakers that have generously agreed to participate in our in our symposium in spite of their heavy agendas. And also I want to finally thank the Sloan Foundation, which is our sponsor, for their support. And with that, let's get started with our first panel on health applications of neurotechnology. And I will pass the baton to my colleague, Dr. Sean Pauzauskie, who's the medical director of the Neurorights Foundation. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Yuste, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm Sean Pauzauskie, MD, a hospital neurologist and clinical researcher in the University of Colorado System and current medical director of the Neurorights Foundation. Today, we'll begin with a discussion of mental augmentation in the context of health, what it means both for patients and for those who wish to enhance their normal human capabilities. And for the purposes of this discussion, we'll define health using the World Health Organization's definition as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And so now to introduce our esteemed panel of experts, and I'll introduce them in the order in which they'll speak. First, Dr. Michelle Hampson is the leading researcher in the field of neurotechnology and mental health. A faculty member at Yale Medical School, her work focuses on the development of real-time fMRI neurofeedback techniques, and this cutting-edge approach allows individuals to gain direct control over their own brain activity, opening new possibilities for the treatment of psychiatric and neurological disorders. Her research has explored how neurofeedback can help patients with conditions such as obsessive-compulsive disorder, Tourette syndrome, and PTSD, offering a non-invasive self-directed method of neural regulation. Dr. Hampson's work sits at the intersection of neuroscience, mental health, and emerging human rights discussions, as neurotechnologies raise important ethical questions about cognitive autonomy and mental privacy. And today she'll share her insights into the potential and challenges of neurofeedback as a tool for mental augmentation. Dr. Pascual-Leone is a world-renowned neuroscientist and leading expert in transcranial magnetic stimulation, a non-invasive technique that can modulate brain activity. His research has advanced our understanding of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and change, and has explored both the therapeutic and enhancement potential of brain stimulation. As a professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School and a pioneer in non-invasive neurotechnologies, Dr. Pascual-Leone has worked extensively on how TMS can improve cognitive functions like memory, learning, and attention. His work has profound implications for mental augmentation, raising critical questions about the future of human cognition. Beyond the lab, Dr. Pascual-Leone is a leading voice in the ethical debate surrounding neurotechnology and human rights. He advocates for the right to control and protect one's own mental processes while warning against potential misuse, such as coercion in the workplace or the military, unequal access to cognitive enhancement, and the risks of unregulated brain interventions. Today, he'll explore how neurotechnology is reshaping human potential and discuss the ethical safeguards needed to ensure that advancements in brain augmentation benefit all of society. And finally, Dr. Dainius Pūras is a distinguished psychiatrist, human rights advocate, and global leader in mental health policy. Dr. Pūras is a professor at Vilnius University in Lithuania and has spent decades working at the intersection of mental health, public policy, and human rights. From 2014 to 2020, he served as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to health, both mental and physical, where he challenged traditional approaches to mental health care and called for a shift away from coercion and over-reliance on biomedical treatments. Instead, he has championed a human rights-based approach that prioritizes social determinants, dignity, and empowerment in mental health services. As we explore the implications of emerging neurotechnologies for mental augmentation, Dr. Pūras' insights will be invaluable in helping us navigate the ethical, legal, and human rights dimensions of these advancements. And so please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel, each of whom will now speak for 10 minutes, followed by questions and answers.
Thank you, Sean, for the invitation to join in this meeting, this very interesting and important meeting. So I'm going to be talking today about neurofeedback. Many people are probably familiar with EEG neurofeedback, which has been around in the clinics for decades. But I'm going to speak more about fMRI neurofeedback, which is a newer technique that has really demonstrated what neurofeedback is capable of. So what do I mean by fMRI neurofeedback, we just put somebody in an MR scanner. We're collecting functional imaging data, allowing us to monitor how some aspect of their brain function is changing over the course of the scan. And we give them feedback, showing them how that aspect of brain function is changing. And they practice trying to control it using the feedback that we give them as a training signal. So when I tell people about this kind of work, one of the first questions they typically ask is, does it work? And I would say that's heavily dependent on exactly what you're training, whether people can actually get benefit from it. I have a lovely graduate student in my lab named Jitendra who has a great analogy for neurofeedback, which is that neurofeedback is not the drug, it's the syringe. There are a lot of random things you can inject somebody with a bacterial infection with that wouldn't help them. But if you find just the right antibiotic, it can be helpful. And similarly for neurofeedback is administering an intervention. The intervention, the magic ingredient, is what we're training in the brain. And there are plenty of things you could try training in the brain that aren't going to help people. We have to find those things, those very specific things that can potentially help people. So I think a more appropriate question about the efficacy of neurofeedback is, can it work? If we train the right aspect of brain function in the right way, can we alter mental function in the targeted manner we desire? And there's very clear indication in the literature that yes, indeed, in many cases we can. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that literature. So first of all, this is a science paper that was published by the DECNEV group. DECNEV stands for Decoded Neurofeedback. This group uses fMRI neurofeedback to train patterns of activity in visual cortex. In this study, they were identifying patterns of activity associated with 3 different Gabor gratings, spread 60 degrees apart from each other. And they assigned each subject in the study to be trained towards one of these patterns associated with one of these specific line orientations. Subjects were completely blind to what they were being trained on. The way DECNEV works is they see a green circle on the screen. The circle gets bigger when their brain pattern approaches the desired pattern, gets smaller when it becomes more different, and they are paid based on the size of that circle. So they're highly motivated to grow the circle. So in this study, it became clear very quickly that they were successfully inducing the desired target pattern in subjects. This figure shows the brain training effects. The red is how often they expressed the desired target pattern that they were being trained towards. The blue and green are the other 2 patterns. And they clearly very quickly started to express the desired pattern more frequently, and that just increased throughout training. They also had a behavioral measure they collected before and after the training. They wanted to see if they could shift the perceptual curves of subjects so that they were better able to perceive the target orientation. And indeed, that's exactly what they saw. That's what they're showing here. This is a middle panel of their figure where they show that they had a dramatic effect on the perceptual curve for the target line orientation, but not the other 2 line orientations. So they improved people's ability to perceive this particular line orientation. And I want to emphasize how strong the blinding was in this study. The subjects were told they were asked after the study, what do you think you were trained on? And they reported, answers that were all over the map, an open-ended question. They were then told, actually, we trained you to be better able to perceive one of these 3 line orientations. Which line orientation do you think it was? And they were given a forced choice question, and the subjects performed at chance on that forced choice question. So these subjects really had no idea what had been altered in terms of their perception, but they had very large perceptual changes. So there are many other well-controlled trials of this nature where they've shown they can manipulate many other aspects of mental function, such as facial preference. They've changed bidirectionally. They've manipulated confidence, and so on and so forth. So I strongly recommend you look at this literature if you're skeptical about the efficacy of neurofeedback. But these are studies that have all reported precisely targeted changes in mental function. They're well-controlled studies with strong blinding, counterbalancing, and often bidirectional manipulation. And this is really also important to note that these studies are inducing large effect sizes. So these aren't just tiny little changes in perception or cognition. There are very large effect sizes, as I showed in this table from the DECNEV website, where they're reporting the effect sizes in this column. So this is exciting from a mental health perspective, because if we have an intervention where we can change mental function in precise ways with large effect sizes, that's promising. We also need these effects to persist, right? If people, come in and they get trained and the effects disappear a day later, that's not going to be really clinically useful, because we can't bring people in every 2 days to keep training them. So the question is, are the effects transient? Actually, quite a few neurofeedback studies have now followed up their studies and reported that the effects that were induced do persist days to weeks to months later. and even years in some cases. And actually, it's more surprising than that. In the study that we ran, we found that the symptoms not only persisted after training, but actually continued to grow in the month following training. And we found that across multiple studies, and other groups are also now reporting a similar effect. So in general, this is really promising that neurofeedback has the potential to shift the trajectories of patients onto a long-term, healthier brain pattern. So it's very promising from a clinical perspective. And there has been some clinical development already. I'm going to highlight a couple gems that have emerged. The first of these is a study by Kim Young's group, where they're training people to upregulate amygdala during positive autobiographical memory recall for depression. She uses double-blind randomized trials where the control group is trained on a different brain area, and she finds consistently, significantly more symptom improvement in the experimental group. So that's encouraging. She also pulled together this table which summarizes the effect she's induced in her first 3 randomized trial in the subjects who got the real neurofeedback. The main outcome measure in her studies is the BDI, or Beck Depression Inventory. A 15% improvement in symptoms in the BDI is considered clinically significant. So if you've made this much improvement in a subject, you've made a substantial change in their life. And the average symptom improvement she got across all 50 subjects in these first 3 trials was 36% improvement on the BDI, which is just a whopping effect and very exciting. So that's one very exciting intervention. Another one I'll highlight is the work by Tolma Hendler's group in Israel. What's really cool about their work, they're trying to develop neurofeedback to treat PTSD by training people to downregulate the amygdala in stressful contexts. But one very exciting thing about their work is that they started by putting people in the scanner with a EEG cap on and doing simultaneous EEG fMRI, using the fMRI to track what was happening in the amygdala, and that allowed them to identify a biomarker in the EEG signal to train. They call this their amygdala EFP fingerprint. So they actually train using using EEG neurofeedback. Although it was fMRI inspired. And before and after the training, they also do fMRI scans to check that their training is improving people's ability to control the amygdala, which they have consistently found it does. They've also found it works to improve symptoms in PTSD patients, and they recently formed a company called Gray Matters Health, which has received approval from the FDA to market their headset in the US for treating PTSD. So neurofeedback is a super promising new intervention for the treatment of clinical brain disorders. It allows targeted modulation of specific aspects of mental function. These effects that it induces are often of very large size, and they tend to persist after training. And there's been a demonstration already that these fMRI neurofeedback interventions that are showing so much promise can potentially be translated to EEG for easier dissemination. So all of this is very exciting, but of course, there are also some ethical concerns that are raised, given that many of the basic science fMRI neurofeedback studies have shown that they can manipulate various aspects of mental function covertly, with people having no idea what has been trained. And if these interventions get translated to more portable, accessible modalities and broadly disseminated, of course, that raises some ethical concerns. We were worried about that, so we partnered with some colleagues at the Yale Law School, Gideon Yaf and Fiona Fonari, and wrote a paper, which I'll referring you to here if you're interested in. Also, I will mention that if you're interested in learning more about fMRI neurofeedback, we recently published a textbook on this. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Hampson. That we'll turn it over to Dr. Pascual-Leone.
Sean, thank you very much, and thank you, the Neurorights Foundation, for the opportunity to joining you today to talk about non-invasive brain stimulation in the context of augmenting human abilities. Let me preface my brief remarks by highlighting the fact that, like Sean, I'm a neurologist, and the development of technologies, neurotechnologies, to allow patients to cope with the disabling symptoms of neurological or, in general, brain diseases is, of course, what drives us. There is, however, a gray zone in developing those technologies because it becomes possible to start addressing symptoms or contributors to the disability that could possibly be appealing to those who are healthy, particularly if one embraces, and I completely agree with doing so, the broader definition of health of the World Health Organization that Sean has shared. So consider, for example, the notion of resilience or of coping mechanisms, accepting the degree of dysfunction that a given illness may convey to an individual, and enabling us as individuals to cope better with those disabling symptoms. Such abilities, resilience, reserve, coping mechanisms, broadly speaking, could be valuable in day-to-day interactions. And the potential of enhancing, augmenting capacity in health to make us, quote, healthier is what all brings us all here. If I may share a few slides, hopefully you can see the slides okay. So the topic in my mind is sort of a jump starting of your brain, which again promises the possibility of enhancing the efficacy of an individual's brain capabilities in coping with a changing world. The potential of increasing function in a more directed, specific way than education or training would do, enhancing resilience to cope with adverse events, perhaps even optimize plasticity, learning mechanisms, and so on. So if we open the door of that possibility, then we need to first realize that the approach and the desire to develop such methodologies is actually not new. The history of neurotechnologies, broadly speaking, is rich with attempts, including non-invasive attempts, as shown here, to actually improve human abilities beyond disease treatments alone. That ranges from scribonis largus all the way to Duchenne and others using transcranial stimulation or brain electric stimulation to try to enhance abilities, not just to treat disease. I'm going to be talking mostly about transcranial magnetic stimulation. This is an example of an application of it. Electromagnetic induction using Faraday's principle of electromagnetic induction allows to induce sufficient current in the brain to depolarize neurons. And as the video went through, hopefully when the clicking happened, you could see the hand contralateral twitch as the field was targeting the motor cortex. There are versions of such devices that are handheld. They are all developed for good reasons. These techniques are useful and, in fact, FDA cleared for various illnesses that can otherwise be disabling. In the case of the home health device, for treatment of migraine. In the case of this laboratory-based device, the initial indication was treatment of medication refractory depression. There is a growing number of indications, but there is also the appeal of potentially using such techniques to improve acquisition of skills, to speed up learning, to make people more capable of coping with unexpected events in life. And there are non-invasive methods called transcranial current stimulation that are even more easy to develop, easier to deploy, less expensive, and with that, cross the line from medical devices to direct to consumer devices, opening up a whole other range of potential considerations. The idea of amping up brain function then has become increasingly appealing, and it's not science fiction or movies alone. Oftentimes movies foretell things that will become reality, and for example, ongoing work by the Air Force has shown that one can enhance ability to identify targets in complex radar images for unmanned attack drones and potentially make performance better. To me, a lot of this ethical debate that is necessary goes back to the pioneering work of José Manuel Rodríguez Delgado, who in Yale in the 1960s and 70s developed methodologies to modify behavior and explore really behavior, again, with a translational clinical goal, but it included very famous depictions of the ability to do so, including the use of stimulation to stop a bull. This is very debated at the time. It led all the way to the argument of a psycho-civilized society. And I think it captures in many ways the same issues that with greater, more precise, and easier deployable technologies we face these days. Again, the literature has captured this very amply in many different ways with both the positives and the negatives that could come from it. And what it seems clear is that an ethical debate is necessary. And I think this forum is exactly the kind of thing that is needed to not wait for problems, but rather to anticipate them. I think there is an inherent danger in letting the media capture the imagination. Can a father or a mother be appealed in trying to make your child better? Well, that's what education is. If we can do it so and do it safer, that needs to be addressed appropriately. So what is necessary? I think the first thing that we need to be cognizant about is that we should not regulate in such a way that it would minimize the potential for the development of new industries, consumer devices, and otherwise. I think there is a value in that is important for society. It needs to be weighted against the potential risks and appropriately disclosed and appropriately regulated. There is the reality to contend of. There is already in place a very active group of do-it-yourselfers who exchange information about how to enhance function in themselves. And rather than limiting that, perhaps what we need to do is appropriately engage and learn from it while providing guidance that includes being realistic with them about what we know and don't know. There are in clinical settings off-label applications of these technologies. Beyond the FDA-approved devices, there are applications of the technology for other purposes. And in the absence of potential standard of care possibilities, that again needs to be appropriately regulated to prevent abuse. The multiplicity of applications is huge. It's only increased. There are many different areas worth going after. But I think one overarching issue to consider is the possibility that enhancing or improving one ability, it might actually come at a cost of others, that the system might be a net zero sum system. And so therefore that there might be unknowns that we don't know. Let me skip through this for the sake of quickly highlighting the fact that there is enormous variability in the targets depending on the goal of the experiments that have shown beneficial effects. But with that, also the possibility of interaction between those targets with a negative outcome. So at the end of the day, a lot of real important scientifically unresolved open issues remain, from uncertainty about mechanisms of action to individual variability, all the way to this net zero sum issue I was raising based on interaction between brain network dynamics. I think it's important to address those, but I think it is important to realize that the field and the appeal of the potential of enhancement is so high, and the technology is becoming so easy to reach and to use, that we need to regulate in parallel to developing answers to these questions, or else we risk a potential confronting with downstream effects of maluse of the technologies, which none of us wants to face. Maybe I'll stop there in terms of opening remarks, and we can, I'm sure, come back to some of these issues in the discussion later.
Thank you, Dr. Pascual-Leone. And with that, we'll turn it over to Dainius Pūras.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of this symposium and panel, and I will try to contribute with my experience. I'm not an expert in neurotechnologies, but maybe I will share my experience, especially of these 6 years when I was serving as a United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to physical and mental health, and this is a very good position to see the global picture. Of course, the mandate was very broad, so I had to pick priorities, and everybody agreed that when I chose mental health as a priority, because as we all know, mental health is finally out of shadows. It is a central theme in not only health, but social policies. But agreement of experts stops at the need to invest more. So this is easier, but everybody agrees. And then disagreements start, and I was working on these disagreements, meeting different experts and trying to see if some compromise is possible, and you understand what is the tension about, because mental health care and psychiatry, at least so far, is different from other fields of medicine. For example, neurology, for many reasons, and this is a desperate search for biomarkers, but not very successful. It is desperate search for effective treatments, and as you know, that it happened that after domination of psychoanalysis some 45 years ago, there was this shift in pendulum or in paradigm, and biomedical model came with bold promises. And after 40 years, this now there is agreement that most of these promises were not became a reality, both with regard to biomarkers. So experts in psychiatry will tell, we don't know what is schizophrenia, we don't know what is depression. Well, maybe we thought that it's about chemical imbalance, but that was just a hypothesis, and so on and so on. And these expectations which were raised when, big pharma tried also to sell things like Prozac and so on. And now there is some sobering moment to rethink many things. It's not about disqualifying biomedical interventions, but it was obvious, and when I was compiling all views of all experts, it was my duty to inform stakeholders that the obstacles which are in mental health care to progress with the right to mental health, they are overuse of biomedical overuse and misuse of biomedical paradigm and biomedical interventions, but also power asymmetries. What happened when in other fields of medicine there is progress with moving from paternalistic approach to to partnership between service providers and service users. This does not happen so easily in psychiatry because there is still a lot of paternalism within psychiatrists use or misuse their power, telling that we know. And in fact, they do not know many things, what is happening, in fact. And the biggest ironical paradox was that this paradigm promised end discrimination and stigma. So we will say now that mental health disorders are the same as other medical disorders, instead of thinking that people are lazy and so on, and stigma will disappear. No, with overuse of biomedical model, people were disempowered and not empowered. So if you tell to the person, just take these pills and sit in your room and don't forget to take pills, and if we think that such model will solve the problem, so now it's understanding that okay, medications may be needed, of course, but they are not enough. They are even not a first priority treatment in many cases. So I just think that maybe all these insights, which are now already presented in World Health Organizations, because no special rapporteurs, they start, they provoke, they are attacked, then this is our duty. But after that, what happened, that now all these messages you can read in official documents of World Health Organizations to abandon overuse of biomedical model, which gave rise to more coercion. So one of paradoxes. The more we invest in this biomedical model in psychiatry, the more involuntary, the more we apply involuntary measures. So this is sort of what we have both in global south, but also in global north. We have a vicious cycle when this coercion, hopelessness, and power paternalism, they reinforce each other, and they make mental health care the real problem, the headache for countries which we have a lot of violations of human rights within mental health services in the name of medicine and psychiatry, which is very painful for medical doctors to understand. And they are also hostages of this failed system, the same as providers of services. But of course, I do not want to say that we should be very pessimistic, no, but we should learn from these lessons. And maybe with the theme of this symposium, with this new generation of advances in science, I mean neurotechnologies, we can balance better psychosocial and biomedical elements, which are equally important, and everybody understands this, and everybody was saying all the time about biopsychosocial, yes, but in reality, bio was dominated and not in best fashion. I mean, there was issues with transparency, there was some ideas which I was hearing in many countries by otherwise bright young doctors. And when you ask what would you do with big grant if you receive 10 million or so, and they immediately jump to new eugenics, to something that we want to cure everything, and we want to prevent people from having psychosocial disabilities. So it sounds sometimes not very well like new eugenics, that in future we will not have mental health conditions through advances of miracles of biomedicine. So this I think went wrong, and if we add all this serious approach to Neurorights, which I like very much, this approach, this Neurorights, which are I found in your text. So I am quite optimistic about that we could learn from this just quite painful pages. Not to speak, it happened before also, and I don't want to repeat. Everybody knows story with the lobotomy, Nobel Prize, and then condemnation. Yes, but it was not only lobotomy. It is repeating and repeating, and then we promise a magical cure. I read in one textbook recently a sentence: "There is no cure from autism so far." And I was thinking, what the author meant here? How can you cure autism, which is not a disease, you know? So, and all these issues which I mentioned maybe chaotically now, like this overuse of biomedical model, like these power asymmetries and disempowering users instead of empowering, but also to mention biased use of knowledge and evidence, because there was knowledge about, you know, chemical imbalances, but there was a lot of knowledge that depression may have, you know, psychosocial roots. But somehow this disbalance happened, and in textbooks, the doctors are learning still about chemical imbalances and jump immediately to medical treatment of even mild emotional crisis, which is a wrong idea. So so I was thinking what could be my contribution to this debate, and I am not against, as a medical doctor, of course, I'm not against, and I support very much innovations in healthcare, but somehow we should convince everyone to take seriously human rights. It's not some, you know, theoretical things. It's very practical, and we know from history, from medicine, that things go wrong when it's wrong with informed consent and with access, with equal access. So these are all issues which should be discussed very seriously also when neurotechnologies are applied in practice. Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Dr. Pūras, and thank you, Dr. Hampson and Pascual-Leone. So now we will begin our question and answer period. We did want to encourage anyone viewing in the audience to use the Q&A function. There's a button on the Zoom. You can enter your question, and we'll have a few questions for each panelist, and then jump into the audience Q&A. So please do submit your questions through the Q&A function in the Zoom. So this first question, we'll start with Dr. Hampson. I'm curious, neurofeedback and the comparison that we might have to pharmaceuticals or other non-invasive treatments in terms of their effectiveness and risk. And can you talk a little bit about how these augmenting medical technologies, neurotechnologies, might compare to pharmaceuticals?
Okay, so first, efficacy. I think that they work through very different mechanisms of action. Pharmaceuticals work by changing molecular structure of things in the brain, and neurofeedback works via natural learning mechanisms. And so because of this, they're likely to be useful for treating very different kinds of disorders. I think of it, you know, on the neurofeedback side, PTSD is a really promising disorder to target, because PTSD was essentially caused, you know, you had a traumatic event, you learned a very unhealthy way of thinking, and that circuitry is all plastic, and you can probably unlearn what you learned. So I think neurofeedback is super promising for disorders like PTSD, where rewiring the brain into a healthier pattern can really cure the basic problem. And I think PTSD is a hard disorder for pharmaceutical interventions to really help with. And there's been a lot of effort to develop pharmaceuticals for PTSD and not a huge amount of success. On the far end of the spectrum is Huntington's disease, right? This is a genetic disorder that has molecular basis, and it seems to me that neurofeedback has very little chance of really curing Huntington's disease. It may be useful for helping people, compensate in some ways and have happier lives, but it's not going to get at the root problem of the disorder, in my opinion. Whereas pharmaceuticals, I think it's very hopeful that one day they will be able to address diseases like Huntington's disease. So I think the positive side of this is that these two different kinds of interventions potentially complement each other, and hopefully they will result, as they both get developed in parallel, hopefully this will result in clinicians having a good toolkit of possible therapies that are useful for many different kinds of disorders to treat people optimally. So that's to address your first question about efficacy. The other half of your question about risk, I think, neurofeedback is based on natural learning. So it is less risky than pharmaceuticals, which are altering the molecular structure of things in the brain. But, a little bit of a cushion for that with the pharmaceuticals is that they're often extensively tested in animals before they're given to people, which we don't do in neurofeedback. So they do, that does ameliorate it somewhat. I still think neurofeedback is probably less risky, but this doesn't mean that it doesn't have risks, because our understanding of brain function is pretty limited. And, we may be trying to train up cognitive function and not realize that that brain area we're altering also has a role in motor function, and maybe people are starting to have motor problems and falling down a lot, right? Well, how are we going to find that out? Well, I think the only way we're really going to be able to track these things is if in our studies, we include careful adverse events monitoring of subjects after neurofeedback and follow them up for a while. And we really take seriously the job of, looking at that data and seeing if there's any patterns emerging suggesting there might be, adverse side effects. One of the exciting things, I think, for neurofeedback from a clinical perspective is that if we do have an intervention that can do positive things but also has an adverse side effect, and we can identify in the brain what the biomarker of the adverse side effect is, we could potentially train down the side effect while training up what we wanted to train up originally. So it has great flexibility in terms of creating any kind of cost function that can tamp down certain things and elevate other things. And so if we can identify these potential adverse events early, we can potentially address them and improve our interventions as a result. So I'm a big advocate for, thorough adverse events monitoring in all neurofeedback studies, even the basic science ones, for these reasons.
Yeah, it's just fascinating what's going to be possible in terms of, mitigating side effects and training up, various capabilities. Thank you for that. Would like to turn to Dr. Pascual-Leone. Your research has shown that brain plasticity, or the ability of the brain to adapt and change, can remain in different capacities throughout life. And I'm just curious, how far do you think we can push this plasticity through non-invasive stimulation, and where do you see the medical applications of transcranial magnetic stimulation in 10 to 20 years?
Thank you, Sean. I'm rather bullish about the potential for neurotechnologies in general. I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg of where all these technologies, all the ones we've been talking about, and others that will be addressed, we're just at the tip of the iceberg, and I envision that they will be combined. So, for example, one could easily conceptualize neurofeedback combined with brain stimulation to augment the benefit, accelerate the benefit of neurofeedback, to solidify some changes, and so on. So I think we're going to see a very rapid development, which, by the way, is precisely the reason why this appropriate timing for regulations is now, not later. That said, I think that the fundamental intervention that these the technologies have onto the brain is probably through modifying, guiding, as it were, modulating the mechanisms of brain function itself. And a core component of that is plasticity. I don't think we can activate or deactivate plasticity, but we can shift the efficacy of the changes. We can enhance some and suppress others. And I think that's what, at the end of the day, these techniques are doing, if we understand better what they're doing, to Michelle's point earlier, I completely agree, we can tailor the desired effect, sharpen it. The ultimate promise of these technologies is to be very precise in a precision medicine kind of point of view, enhancing certain changes, suppressing others, and being very selective, something that with pharmacology, at least to date, is difficult to accomplish. I always think of washing the entire brain with a given intervention versus in a very specific kind of way with a dropper of single drips of water filling up a very specific glass in the middle of a room rather than washing everything. So it's that promise that we want to realize. We're far from realizing it with the technologies today, but I envision an integration of multiple technologies that include invasive and non-invasive ones. I think that one comment along those lines, if I may, Sean, it's a final point, is that what we cannot assume is that there's only upside, right? If there is a potential for beneficial effect, there's has to be negative consequences, and the challenge there that I fear is that in this time course of potential side effects may be very different than the time course of desired effects. So you can envision in the kind of patients I deal with that we can enhance memory in somebody with a neurodegenerative disorder. We can overcome disability now and for some period of time. But that in the long run, we maybe induce a hyperexcitability state of specific networks that make them more susceptible to neuroinflammatory cascades and ultimately neurodegeneration. And the time course is so different that it requires a very upfront, very explicit disclosure of the risk benefit and the potential inability to fully capture the risks in the long run, which is part of the reason why I think the question of what is applicable and appropriate in the setting of disease becomes so distinct from what is appropriate and applicable in the setting of health for augmentation.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating dichotomy of bringing people, back from a state of less than health to what goes beyond, and we'll open that up to the panel here in a second. But I wanted to turn to Dr. Pūras. Your work, you've highlighted concerns about coercion in mental health treatment. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how we can safeguard against a potential coercion of individuals to undergo cognitive enhancement for employment or societal pressures, or where do you see the ethical issues related there?
Again, I see maybe some parallel. At least we should know what may happen, also with good intentions, because all these things which went wrong, they happened with good intentions, but without proper serious attention to all human rights. As we know, human rights is about freedoms, but also entitlements. And we need to think how to practically implement all these ethical safeguards, which is not easy also because there are some problems with democracy in the world. There is some tendency to move to authoritarian regimes, and then the context is not very good for human rights in general, also in our field. So these are threats and pitfalls. They are here. We need to know, not to pretend that they do not exist. Third parties, they are interested in what is happening within human minds, and if it is not any longer science fiction, that minds can be not read or controlled, and then how we prevent these possible grave violations. And This is about workplace, of course. This is about army, as it was mentioned. This is about children, because all the time, all the biggest fights are about children. It seems that everybody agrees about children. In fact, all human rights, most passionate fights about human rights are about human rights of the child. How much we allow them with evolving capacities to become responsible adults. And then when we use technologies, which is okay, either for enhancement, I mean, with in children who do not have any conditions, health conditions, or for let's say treatment. In all these cases, we have to think about rights of children, rights of adolescent. One thing is baby, but if we manage adolescent issues in the way we are behaving with baby, then it will go wrong. So this is classics of human rights, and I think for this we do not need new human rights, but maybe for some other issues, I would agree that we need some specific human rights for neurotechnologies. So yeah, so this would be my comments.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's yeah, just such a fascinating ethical environment that we're living in. I wanted to ask a question to the general panel about the current framework of ethical regulations, and if it's sufficient, in your opinion, to regulate advancements in neurotechnological mental augmentation, or do we need a new framework? And if so, what that framework might look like?
Just if I may just jump in, I think the separation between medical and non-medical, quote unquote, indications becomes critical here. I think for the medical indications, the regulatory framework almost everywhere is very good. And so I think we're on relatively safe grounds there. Not that I trust the physicians like me at all, but you see what I'm saying. But I think it becomes very tricky when there is a direct-to-consumer devices, when there are do-it-yourself movements, when we're talking about technologies that are relatively easily accessible. I mean, I can tell you stories of my own practice in consultation of, for example, of parents coming to consult about potential side effects of what they have been doing with their child. Long story short, having caused a significant burn in the subclavian fossa because of an extracephalic reference of the non-invasive brain stimulation that they have been applying to improve mathematical thinking in their kid. Very well intended, horrific outcomes. And what is the regulatory framework for that? I think is very, very, very unclear and is very different in different countries. And I think it's the kind of work that is critically needed from foundations like the Neurorights Foundation. How can we promote education, B, ensure an appropriate framework that is both ethical and protective of individuals? So to short answer to your question, Sean, no, I don't think that the framework is sufficient right now. But I think it needs to be balanced, that framework, to not stifle innovation. We want to still enable the development of new technologies. God knows we need them. But I think how can we balance that development while at the same time protecting individuals from good use that may go wrong or from misuse of those technologies?
Yeah, I want to second that perspective that the medical side is pretty well regulated already, but there's this sort of scary potential, especially, in neurofeedback. You could have a headset that's marketed for convenience purposes. We're going to read your brain patterns to optimize what we show you in the VR goggles for your convenience, right? People might not even know that that's the full setup for brain training and that they could be influenced by wearing that headset, right? And that's, but currently there's no law to enforce that that shouldn't be done. So those kinds of non-medical applications are really kind of scary.
Yes.
I
Okay.
agree. I don't think that I have something special to add. I agree. We need some, not in all fields, but in some we need more regulations. I am concerned about identity issues. They may become crucial. There are many identities, as you know, and it's again about children and young people. So to protect identity, that we have to think not only about legal issues, but also policy and what messages we're sending to stakeholders. I just give example from other field, but how to show how world is changing about identity. It's about assisted reproductive technologies. So as you know, millions of people are already living and they become adults, and now they fight for the right to know their roots, which is against existing laws. So this is how we see clashes of, the clashes of rights. And we will see what will happen, but something will happen with this conflict. And they are right that they have a right to know their roots. This is in Convention of the Rights of the Child. But also in the theme which we discussed now, it's a lot about, should be about cultural identity and many other identities.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Well, I think we'll finish on that note. We could clearly talk for, many more hours about these issues, and hopefully we've raised a lot more questions than we've answered. And thank you to our panelists. And for now, we will take a 10-minute break and resume with our next panel at 12:25.